So, hello everyone. I'd like to really warmly welcome you to this evening's seminar, Supporting Students' Mental Health and Wellbeing Through Everyday Interactions in School Settings. My name is Jamie Smith and I'm the Director of the Schools Division at the Anna Freud Centre, and I'm going to be the chair for the seminar this evening. I hope you're all really well. Thank you so much for joining us, particularly after a long school day. It's fantastic to have people here. I hope it's dry where you are. We've definitely had a lot of rain, so I'm hoping that you're well and dry and ready to spend an hour and a half with us this evening. So we're going to be sharing insights this evening from a new toolkit that's been developed by the Early Intervention Foundation and the Anna Freud Centre. And the toolkit is called the Classroom Wellbeing Toolkit. And it's all about things that you can do as a classroom teacher to really promote and support the mental health of your students, just through your everyday interactions in the classroom, in the corridor, in the school playground, the things that you can just do as part of your everyday life. So we're going to be hearing about the toolkit from the authors, the people that wrote it, hearing about the evidence that sits behind it, and hearing also from teachers that are using it in school settings and hearing about how it's making a difference for them. So there we go. Trouble with the slides there. Right, so this is our programme for the evening. So we're going to have three presentations. The first one will be from Alicia Clark and Miriam Zorgenfrei, who are both from the Early Intervention Foundation. Then we'll hear from Jean Gross, who's an expert in social and emotional mental health. And finally, we'll hear from Rahi Popat, a pastoral support officer at Keon Lodge School. So we'll have the presentations and then we'll have half an hour at the end for questions. And then we'll finish at 6 o'clock. If you've got questions throughout the evening, whenever they come to you, please just type them in. There's a small box for Q&A, so you don't have to wait until the end. You can ask the questions whenever you're ready. Just type them in and we'll collate them and we'll put them all together at the end, and we'll ask them in the last half an hour of the presentation. And then we'll finish at 6. And then I think hopefully we'll be ready to get going now. So this is an example of the Classroom Wellbeing Toolkit. So why did we decide to create this toolkit? Well, whenever we're talking about student mental health, we are always doing that within the framework of a whole school approach to mental health and well-being. So thinking about it in a whole school setting. And when we're doing that, we're thinking about including the whole school community. So any whole school approach to mental health is absolutely being probably led by school leaders, senior mental health leaders, it's being embedded and driven forward by them. But actually, it involves everyone across the community. It involves parents and carers. It involves people in the local community, external stakeholders, local providers. So lots of people are included. It's also about promoting mental health across all aspects of your school life. So through your student voice, through your curriculum, through your culture and your ethos, and through your everyday interactions in the classroom. And that's why classroom teachers and other adults that work in the school are so integral to any successful whole school approach. So when we were looking at what kind of support was out there for classroom teachers, we actually found that there was a lack of practical guidance to really help you in the classroom with what you could do to support student mental health. So this is why the toolkit came about, to fill that gap, to provide tips and strategies, practical advice and guidance for you as a classroom teacher to think about things you can just do as part of your everyday teaching in the classroom to really help support mental health, to create classrooms where children and young people have a sense of belonging, to support building positive relationships, and to think, for example, about supporting students with stress. So that's the idea of the toolkit, to just make sure there are things that you can do as part of your just teaching that will really make a difference for your young people. So this, as I said, this evening we're going to hear from the authors. We're going to hear about how it was co-produced with teachers and with young people. We're going to hear a bit more about the evidence and how EIF went around finding the evidence to make sure that this was an evidence-based toolkit, and also hear from teachers about how they're using it. So hopefully it's going to be really useful. Before we start, just to share just a couple of sort of housekeeping things from me. If you want to share your thoughts with us or get in touch with us in any way, you can do that via the Schools in Mind network. This is our email address, schoolsinmind@annafreud.org. If you want to get in touch, or if you're using social media this evening, that's fantastic. If you could use our handle AFNCCF, and if you can use the hashtag Classroom Wellbeing, that would be brilliant. And the most important thing that people always ask, are you going to share the slides? Yes, we absolutely are going to share the slides. We'll share the slides and we'll also share a recording of the seminar when it's finished. So normally that takes us about 10 days. So if you can just bear with us, wait for 10 days, and then we'll email you the slides and the recording of the seminar. Okay, I think that is just about everything from me. So what I'm going to do now is introduce our first speakers. So I'm delighted now to introduce Dr. Alicia Clark and Miriam Sorgenfrey. Alicia was Director of Evidence at the Early Intervention Foundation just up until last August 2022, and Alicia was leading on EIF's research on child and adolescent mental health and wellbeing. Alicia has been involved in the development and implementation and evaluation of mental health programmes across early childhood education, primary and secondary schools. When Alicia left EIF in August, she moved to working in Ireland and is currently leading on the delivery of mental health and wellbeing initiatives across Ireland. And she's a former primary school teacher. Miriam is a Senior Research Officer at the Early Intervention Foundation, and as part of her research, she's worked on a major review of the effectiveness of school-based interventions that aim to improve student mental health and wellbeing. And following that, Miriam has been working on co-producing evidence-informed practical guidance for school teachers. So Alicia and Miriam are going to provide an overview of the toolkit and its role that it can play in your school. They're going to talk about how young people supported and provided insights into the toolkit and how it was developed with teachers. So huge warm welcome to you, Alicia and Miriam, and over to you.
Thanks, Jamie. I'm just going to share my slides, so just bear with me for 1 second. Great, hopefully you can all see that. Good afternoon, everyone. It's a real pleasure to be here this afternoon and to present our toolkit to you. I'm going to talk about the rationale for developing our toolkit for secondary school teachers, and my colleague Miriam is going to take us through the methodology that we use, so how we went about developing the toolkit. So I think there's no doubt we'll all agree with, I suppose, the first statement here. You know, the mental health of our young people today is our future. And we know that young people, you know, are faced with, you know, growing array of both opportunities and challenges in our increasingly complex society. And we just have to think of the last 12 months, looking at, you know, the pandemic, population migrations, economic uncertainties, sustainability of ecosystem and climate change as an example of just some of the kind of complexities with which young people are faced with on a daily basis. And that's kind of at a societal level, never mind the day-to-day challenges that young people are faced with in both school and family settings. So I think right across the education sector, there's a recognition that, you know, young people need a broad array of cognitive, social and emotional skills in order to be able to support their development. And we can see a growing consensus right through from parents through to teachers, young people themselves, policymakers and employers on the need to develop the whole child to face the challenges of the 21st century. If we look at the current context and youth mental health, internationally, we can see that young people are experiencing increasing levels of mental health problems. So we know that 50% of mental disorders start by the age of 14 and 75% of mental disorders have started by the age of 24. If we hone in on some of the data in England, as an example, we can see that, you know, there's an increasing levels of mental health difficulties developing over the last number of years. So back in 2017, data showed us that 1 in 8 young people were identified as having a probable mental disorder. And this has increased to 1 in 6 in 2020 and remained stable in 2021. So if you think of it in the context of a school and a classroom setting, you know, a classroom of 30 pupils, you're talking about 5 pupils in every class that are likely to have a mental disorder. And we know that mental health difficulties is not just of concern for, you know, the adolescent age range, but longitudinal research has really showed us that difficulties experienced during adolescence is associated with that increased risk of poor adult outcomes in the context of, you know, mental health difficulties during adulthood, so that's depression and anxiety, but also difficulties in relation to employment outcomes, opportunities, physical health and broader social outcomes. So really, I suppose, you know, this is kind of highlighting the need for early intervention, so intervening early to support young people, but also the need to focus in on prevention of mental health difficulties and promoting positive mental health. So we know that the schools are recognised internationally as being a unique setting to support young people's mental health and well-being. But what do we really mean by that? So supporting young people's mental health and well-being, it's concerned with enhancing and protecting their positive mental health. So their ability to function well, to engage with others and to interact with others. It's about supporting young people's capacity to successfully cope with the inevitable difficulties that young people are faced with on a day-to-day basis. It's about, we support that kind of ability to cope well by strengthening young people's social and emotional skills. So some of those skills include helping young people to identify, to articulate, and to regulate their emotions, to develop relationship skills, so good communication skills, developing an ability to empathize with others and understand the perspective of others. It's about enhancing young people's ability to make decisions and to problem solve. In addition to working at that individual level, at that pupil level, developing up these skills, supporting young people's mental health is also about creating supportive environments where young people feel a sense of belonging and a sense of connection. So just, I suppose, in terms of the research, and we've invested quite a lot of time in looking at the research over the last kind of 10 to 15 years, around what does the research tell us about supporting young people's social and emotional skills. And really the evidence is quite compelling. So we have compiled, international data has been compiled looking at interventions that are designed specifically to enhance young people's social and emotional skills. And we can see consistently that when we're working to support social and emotional development, it can lead to improvements in young people's social and emotional skills, in their attitudes about themselves, about others, and about the school. It can also lead to improvements in positive classroom behaviour. In addition to that, we've seen through the research that it can lead to reductions in conduct problems, reductions in emotional distress, and also can lower drug use amongst pupils. Also, what's really important is that the outcomes, in terms of supporting young people's mental health and well-being at a school level, they're not just solely focused on, mental health and well-being outcomes. Actually, we can see that when it's done well, it can also lead to improvements in academic achievement scores. So one particular research showing that pupils who received social emotional learning interventions, these pupils, it resulted in 11 percentile point gain in academic attainment. There's also good evidence that it's not just pupils that benefit from social and emotional development, but actually teachers can benefit from it too. So teachers who possess good social and emotional skills, who've been trained in supporting young people's social and emotional development, have been shown to be better able to develop and manage nurturing relationships with pupils, to manage behaviour in the classroom, to regulate their own emotions. And actually the research shows that they're more likely to stay in teaching for longer. So what are the key approaches to supporting social and emotional development in schools? So there's three main approaches coming through from the evidence when we look at it. The first approach is really around the delivery of universal classroom-based programs within the classroom setting. So this is about teaching skills to all students in the classroom through a developmentally appropriate curriculum. So you have a range of programs that you will have heard of. You have social emotional learning programs which are implemented. You might have some mindfulness-based programs, some positive psychology programs. And really the evidence base, points to the importance of social and emotional learning programs in enhancing pupils' outcomes. The second type of approach is the targeted approaches for those pupils who are considered to be at higher risk of developing mental health difficulties. So this includes programs that are delivered in a small group basis, or often on a one-to-one basis to those who are most at risk. Generally, the programs are using cognitive behavioral therapy techniques, and are programs that are most effective are seen to be delivered by external professionals for those who are most at risk of developing mental health difficulties. The third main approach, the approach that Jamie mentioned, is the delivery of a whole school approach to supporting pupils' mental health and well-being. And this is about a coordinated action across multiple key components. So having strong leadership, creating that supportive environment for pupils, working together to ensure that the pupil's voice is embedded in decision-making, having that curriculum learning, and then working with external stakeholders, which can include both parents and mental health professionals. So just taking a look at the adoption of a whole school approach, a key component of the whole school approach is that creation of a supportive environment. And how do we go about creating a supportive environment? So one way we can do it is by equipping all teachers with a set of practical strategies that they can use in their everyday interactions to support young people's mental health and well-being. And the focus here is really around the everyday interactions. So it's about supporting teachers and how they interact with pupils, in building positive relationships in the classroom, in creating a sense of belonging in the classroom, in modeling these key social and emotional skills, such as our ability to identify and regulate our emotions, and also in being able to respond to pupils' needs. And Jamie has talked about this already. So when we, have looked at the evidence base and looked at the types of interventions that are being delivered and the work that's being done with schools, really we can see there's quite an imbalance there, in that most of the work has been done at the program level. So we're delivering programs and we know quite a lot about what works in the context of the classroom-based curriculum. And actually we can see that we know less about and have provided schools with a lot less on these practical resources to support the delivery of a whole school approach and to really support the teachers' engagement in supporting young people's mental health and well-being. So this was kind of the rationale for developing our toolkit. And I really, I suppose the kind of the quote there at the bottom, that mental health is everyone's business. This is what we're trying to get at through this. So be it an English teacher, science teacher, maths teacher, it's about how I interact as a teacher to support mental health and well-being. So Miriam is going to take us through the methodology that we've used to develop the toolkit.
Thank you. So as Alicia was just saying, I'm now going to explain to you how the idea to produce a practical resource for teachers became a reality. As you can see here on the slide, the process was lengthy. I apologize in advance if this section feels a little bit technical at times. I do my best to avoid jargon and explain each phase of the process and why it mattered. So as we've heard earlier today, and as I'm sure many of you have heard previously, there's a need for a whole school approach to supporting young people's mental health and well-being. And of course, programs like the rollout of the mental health support teams and the senior mental health lead training are key for supporting schools to establish such a whole school approach. However, to embed a whole school approach, all teachers need some guidance on how they can support students as part of their roles. So our evidence review that Alicia talked about does not speak directly to teachers. It looked at effective programs, but didn't say what teachers can do in practice. So we set out to translate this evidence into a practical resource. And as Jamie mentioned before starting this work, we reviewed existing guidance and support and found a number of detailed lesson plans and materials that teachers can signpost to. However, we didn't find advice on what teachers can do in practice in their daily interactions and as part of their roles. So that is a gap that we wanted to fill. We wanted to create a toolkit that is easy and intuitive to use, that answers teachers' questions and is a helpful resource that teachers can easily pick up and apply. To get this right, we needed to first hear from teachers. So we conducted a survey about whether teachers are interested in supporting young people's well-being, whether they have the confidence to do so, and what their most urgent questions are. We then met with a small group of 4 teachers and members of staff to discuss the survey results and what a practical toolkit would need to cover. We also met with a group of young champions to discuss their priorities and what they feel teachers should know. Based on these first meetings, we developed a list of questions we were hoping to answer. We then looked at the evidence of effectiveness of school-based interventions by looking back at our evidence review. More specifically, we looked at the practice elements that sit within effective programs. We included 47 interventions in this common elements review, and that helped us to understand which skills are commonly taught in effective programs. And this review of common elements was a great starting point for developing the toolkit. However, it didn't answer all the questions teachers and young people flagged to us as important. So we then reviewed the wider evidence to understand the impact different practices can have, and to understand the role of particular skills, and to understand how these skills could be taught in practice. We also consulted experts with practice experience to move from abstract academic labels to tangible strategies. During the drafting phase, we also spoke again to the young champions to hear about their experience and how teachers could be supportive. We also conducted a brief survey with a wider group of young people to tell us what they do and don't find helpful in their daily interactions with teachers. We then pooled all this information and started drafting the guidance. We shared this with the co-creation group as well as with clinicians and academic experts and made improvements based on their feedback. And finally, we launched the toolkit in the middle of last month. On the next slide, please. Sorry, can we move to the next slide? Thank you so much. So the Classroom Wellbeing Toolkit is unique in the way that it combines the best available research evidence with practice experience and expert knowledge. And as I mentioned earlier, the toolkit is informed by an incredibly comprehensive review of the evidence that helped us to understand what approaches tend to be effective and for whom. The evidence review also helped us to understand under what circumstances programs were effective, and importantly, what kind of support teachers are able to offer and what kind of support works best when delivered by specialized mental health professionals. As I mentioned, we looked at the common elements of effective interventions to make informed recommendations about good practice. However, sometimes the description of these practice elements was very vague, or the link between practices and outcomes was unclear. And we wanted to understand what elements may be the active ingredients and how they might work best in practice. So we conducted additional searches to get a better understanding of these mechanisms. Importantly, we also worked closely with teachers and young people and experts to consider how different recommendations might land and what they may look like in practice. Collaborating with the young champions in the group of teachers was crucial in developing the toolkit. Next slide, please. Both groups have really shaped the toolkit substantially. We heard from teachers and young people about priorities, what the toolkit should cover. The teachers helped us to get the structure, tone, and way of presentation right. And I can't sing their praises high enough. Their insights and friendly challenge have been invaluable throughout the process. Without their input and ideas, the toolkit wouldn't be what it is now. Similarly, hearing from the young champions was incredibly valuable. We needed to make sure that what the guidance advises is acceptable to young people. Hearing about their views and experiences was key to developing the content. We also conducted 2 surveys. Can you go to the next slide, please? One was for teachers and one was for young people, because we wanted to be able to hear from a wider group of both teachers and young people than the co-creation groups. So while working with the small groups was really helpful to understand detailed perspectives, the surveys helped us to understand the broader context. And then discussing the survey results with the small groups really shaped our thinking and helped us to develop this toolkit. Now, I've given you quite a lot of detail, some of which was quite technical. So let's take a look at the output of this work and what the Classroom Wellbeing Toolkit looks like. Next slide, please. Yes, thank you. So as you can see, the Classroom Wellbeing Toolkit consists of 5 modules, one on building supportive relationships, one on creating a classroom where all students feel they belong, one on promoting good mental health, one on responding to stress, low mood and anxiety, and one on preventing bullying, cyberbullying, and sexual harassment. We then also included a section that signposts to further resources for materials that we didn't cover in the previous 5 sections, really. As you can see in the table of contents here, the content is structured around teachers' questions. So teachers don't need to read the full toolkit from front to back, but they can jump to the section or the specific question that they're interested in. So if we can go to the next slide, please, we can take a quick look into one of the modules. So this is an example of module 3, which is on promoting good mental health. And the first question within the module is, how can I support my students to understand and manage their emotions? Each section starts with a summary of the evidence, why the recommended practices are important, as you can see here on the first page. This is then followed by strategies identified by the common elements review I talked about earlier, as well as by practice experience and the wider research evidence. Throughout the toolkit, there are graphs to visualize important ideas and concepts, as well as some quotes from teachers and young people to help bring the toolkit to life. So we hope that you find this toolkit helpful in your daily work and will share it widely with colleagues and staff members who want to help create a supportive environment where young people can flourish and be mentally healthy. Thank you very much. And back to you, Jamie.
Fantastic. Thank you so much, Alicia and Miriam. Really, thank you for kicking us off and getting it started and giving us a really good flavour of the toolkit and where it's come from, and a real good understanding of the evidence that sits behind it. Really helpful. Lots of questions coming in for you already, but we're going to save questions till the end. So I'm going to move on now to the next speaker, and I'm really pleased to introduce Jean Gross, who's going to be our second speaker this evening. Welcome, Jean. Jean is a best-selling author and independent expert on social, emotional and mental health. Jean has been a teacher, an education psychologist, a head of children's services in local authorities, and a visiting and associate fellow at 3 universities. Jean co-authored the Education Endowment Foundation and the Early Intervention Foundation guidance report, Improving Social and Emotional Learning in Primary Schools. She was formerly Government Communication Champion for Children and Young People and led the development of national approaches to social and emotional learning. Jean was awarded a CBE for services to education in 2011. So Jean, we're really pleased to have you here. You're going to illustrate some of the really practical strategies involved in the toolkit, and just talk to teachers about how we could really use them and pick them up in our everyday teaching in school life. So over to you, Jean. Thank you.
Hi, let's get practical. It's lovely to be here, and thank you all so much for being there at the other end of the Zoom. My role in this work was to root the practical strategies firmly in the realities of everyday classroom life largely for subject teachers. So in that, we were always thinking, well, what do teachers have to do anyway? So you can build any strategies we suggest in relation to wellbeing and mental health into the job people do anyway. So it's not extra work. So we have to think about, all teachers give feedback to children. How can they do that in ways that promote mental health? All teachers assess. All teachers manage behaviour. All students have to help students cope with things like exams. So that was the idea. Take what they do and build strategies within that. I want now to explore 5 themes from that everyday classroom practice. And the first one are the strategies we suggest about creating strong relationships. We know from research that positive teacher-pupil relationships make a key contribution to both attainment and well-being. And it is often those little everyday interactions that make the big difference, that teachers don't think they make a difference, but talk to pupils and they will say, yes, it was just that smile. It was just knowing that someone was interested in, cared about me. Some ideas from the toolkit. The first one you probably know already about, greeting students at the door, evidence-based strategy recommended by the Education Endowment Foundation. Having a quick chat as students come into the room just to say, how did your football team do last night, or whatever, to keep that link of knowing about them, caring about them. 2x10 is a little bit more labour intensive. Here, this suggests that teachers take 2 students where they really need to build the relationship, where it's not that strong. And then every day for 10 days or 10 lessons, for those 2 students, they would take a couple of minutes just to have a chat with them about something they know the student is interested in, something outside learning, something about the person. And the Try This personal profiles, this is an idea from, actually comes from Special Educational Needs and Disability. I think it can be applied to every Year 7 pupil who enters secondary school, that their subject teachers might get them to fill in a profile about themselves, just saying, what I'm good at, what I find hard, what I like about history or maths, whatever the subject is. And crucially, what teachers need to know about me in order to teach me the best possible way. This, I think, a lot of mental health for secondary school students is feeling present, feeling that people know them, feeling acknowledged as a whole human being. And this might be one way to go about it. We also included peer group relationships in the toolkit, because again, we know from research that supportive peer relationships are vital for mental health and self-esteem, optimism, academic performance. And we know that peer support protects against depression and the effects of stress. We suggest just little things like making sure that when you teach a class, throughout the year, you give opportunities for everybody to work with random pairs with someone who isn't in their normal friendship group. So you create classroom cohesion by helping students get to know each other, encouraging peer support, giving specific praise, and trying to promote empathy. So in all discussions, getting people to think, how would that feel to your peer, to someone else in the class? We've also included actively teaching students how to work together in groups. Group work happens in classrooms. If it's effective, it can be great in building peer relationships and mutual support. But we often don't teach students how to work in groups. We just say, go and do this in a group. And then it goes wrong and it actually can damage relationships. So we suggest simple things like scaffolding group interaction by giving students sentence starters like, I agree because, or I disagree because, or building on what Jamie said. We think about developing ground rules for the groups so that you work with the class to get them to come up with what makes a group work well. I'll give you an example here of these ground rules. During the lockdowns, I was teaching a group, my year 7 grandsons and some of their friends. And I was teaching them on Zoom, and we did breakout rooms, and I found that they were absolutely useless at breakout rooms. They just didn't know how to do it. So we came back together and I asked them to think about the worst group they'd ever worked with and how were people behaving? What were they doing in the worst group in the world? You might like to do this, and you might think about some staff meetings you've been in, nobody listening, everybody cutting across each other, some people switching off. This group, my group, were really good at this. They could clearly visualize some of the awful groups they'd worked in. And then I asked them to turn these behaviors in the worst group in the world on their head and think of the opposite. What would be the opposite of that? And then from that, they developed their own ground rules for working effectively together. And this is not just about breakout rooms, it's about any group work. These are the ones they came up with. I particularly like what's in the Zoom stays in the Zoom, very clever. I did add one, though, when working with them, disagree with the point, not the person. This comes from the wonderful work of Voice 21, the Orrery charity, and I think it's a great ground rule to have in any group. So that was something about peer support. Next one, Alicia's mentioned what we model. As the adults in the room, we are always modeling something, whether we realize it or not. And how we present ourselves will be picked up by the students. A particular aspect of modelling that we write about in the toolkit is teachers feeling able to model saying how they feel, not letting it all hang out, but simply saying, I'm sorry, everybody, I'm not on top form today. Don't want to talk about it, but things happening. So I'd be really grateful if you keep the noise down today. Being able to say how you feel. The students we consulted, the focus groups of students for this work, they said this was really important. People being real, being able to be real in the classroom and talk about themselves as human beings. So it might be also modeling how you cope with frustration. My laptop's frozen, can't get any IT support. I got to try and stay calm. I need to do some deep breathing here and just manage these feelings of frustration. Modeling. Next, the feedback we give to students. We suggest the kind of feedback that is not just global praise, but very specific about the strategies that students use, what they do to help themselves in order to build self-esteem and self-efficacy, which are vital for mental health and well-being. We need to get students to notice the things that they've done to advance themselves in their learning. Very specific praise, frequent praise. Postcards is one thing where, some schools have a stock of postcards in the classroom. And if a teacher wants to give a student particular praise, to send it home, they scribble on the postcard what the student's done, student takes it to the school office posts it home with a stamp. And I have to say, it might sound silly, but I have seen these on people's fridges, walls. Parents really, really value it, and it does do a great job of building the self-esteem that's helpful for mental health. The electronic equivalent these days are the platforms that schools use to communicate with home, and a teacher can go to their mark book, their electronic mark book on the platform on a Friday, choose 2 students' name, and at the press of a button send home a quick text message to the parents of those 2 students to give them praise. Another aspect of feedback is how we respond to struggle and difficulty in learning. And we know that one aspect of mental health difficulties can be perfectionism and the belief that you must never fail, you must do everything right. There's this lovely acronym that teachers can use with students. You haven't failed. It's a first attempt in learning. And this quote at the bottom is something a teacher once told me, that this is what she said to one of those students who always got everything right and would panic if she didn't. The teacher wanted to convey that it's okay to not get everything right. That's part of learning. So she said to the student, no mistakes. I've wasted your time. If you don't make mistakes, you're not learning. We need to normalize struggle and failure. Next is how we help all students manage the everyday feelings they will have. This is a universal strategy for everybody in the classroom. I'll come to targeted strategies in a minute. I would love for every student to know about the brain and the neuroscience, to know about the frontal lobes, the thinking bit, the limbic system under that, which is the emotions bit, and the reptilian brain at the bottom that manages our automatic systems. I would like them to know how when the emotions, the limbic bit, take over, they release the control of the top bit, the cerebral cortex, and you flip your lid and you're no longer thinking clearly or straight. If every young person understood that, we'd be a lot further forward. I would like every young person to know about the zones of regulation, which are growing in use in schools. I'd like them to know how to identify what zone they're in and how they can move themselves, up-regulate or down-regulate according to where they are. Now, teaching them about how the brain works and about self-regulation is probably the work of PSHE lessons and the work of science teachers, I think. But nevertheless, subject teachers, other subject teachers can still do work with students to help them understand and manage their emotions. An example, every teacher has to deal with students who are very anxious about exams. We can teach students about the stress curve and how, in fact, a little bit of stress energizes you, gets you going, gives you adrenaline, and you do better. And it's only when there's too much stress that it tips over and then you don't perform so well. And having taught them about the stress curve, we can help them reframe the anxiety they might feel about an exam to say, well, yeah, your heart's beating faster, you're breathing fast. This is getting more oxygen to your brain. This is actually a helpful thing. So this is about cognitive reappraisal. We can teach them simple self-regulation strategies like 5-finger breathing, which many of you will know, and you can Google it. Something they can do privately and quietly in an exam to self-regulate if the anxiety begins to tip over. We can use another psychological strategy and get them to think about exams in these terms. Imagine yourself on a beach in 10 years from now, and you think, well, how will you feel then about having not done so well in this exam? Will it matter so much then? Probably not. So that's about distancing yourself, and is a proven strategy. And the last thing I want to talk about is the more targeted work, is how we respond to students who are actually experiencing mental health difficulties, the 5 in every classroom. We've written about helping students understand the strategies they can use to manage emotions. This graphic illustrates one way of doing that. We've written a lot about empathic listening, how teachers can listen to students and accept their feelings. So I can see you're feeling a bit down today. I understand. That ability to listen and not give advice and not deny the student's feelings seems to be crucial when children and young people are struggling. We've also written about reasonable adjustments. Under the Equalities Act, every adult in school has a duty to make reasonable adjustments for those with mental health needs that are substantial and affecting their everyday life. And this is one of our students in the focus group gave us an example of such a reasonable adjustment, not a big deal, not a big thing, just allowing the student to be able to go to a safe space if they needed to. It might be as simple as talking with a student about where they'd like to sit, and some students with high levels of anxiety really prefer to sit near the door. It might be adjusting the amount of homework. We've given some suggestions for reasonable adjustments, but all of these are best discovered by actually listening to students, and they will tell us what they need, like this student was able to say, this is what I need, that's where we want to be. So that's it. We've looked at these 5 aspects of everyday classroom practice, and I hope I've introduced just a few of the strategies we suggest in the toolkit. And I hope that we have managed to frame these in realistic, doable ways, but I look forward to hearing from you in the discussion, and I look forward to that later. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Jean. So many useful strategies you can just pick up and use in the classroom. That's really helpful. Thank you for illustrating that for us. Okay, we're keeping to time, which is fantastic. We're going to move on to our final speaker now, who is Rahi. Welcome, Rahi. Rahi works at an SEMH secondary school based in Leicester for boys and girls aged 11 to 16. Rahi is a pastoral support officer, and he supports children to break down any barriers preventing them accessing school. Rahi is also a qualified senior mental health lead and a mental health first aider, and is currently training to be a counsellor. So Rahi, welcome. You're going to discuss your experience of integrating some of these strategies into practice and talk to us a little bit about how you've managed to engage your staff to pick up the toolkit and use it.
I am, yes. Thank you very much, Jamie, and welcome everybody. It's an absolute pleasure and a delight to be part of this toolkit and implement it at Keyham Lodge School. Okay. So the first step, just a little bit of background, as Jamie said, Keyham Lodge School is an SEMH school for boys and girls aged 11 to 18. And as mentioned, alluded to by Alicia early on as well, we start with a whole school intervention program. You know, it is tiered according to whatever the needs may be. But the most important part of it is that we include the whole school, and is part of our ethos and culture of everything that we do. And this toolkit enhances the provisions that we offer to our children, young people, especially considering we have a very high percentage of students who suffer from anxiety, low mood and low self-esteem as well. So it's been a brilliant toolkit in that aspect, and we use it almost religiously every single day as well. Okay, so how does that impact our everyday kind of going about our businesses, as it were? So it starts with our statement of intent and our 5 key principles that we apply, which are respect, honesty, trust, integrity, and kindness. And what we aim to do is our children, young people come in very self-destructive in their behaviors, in their mannerisms, and we want them, by the time they leave us, to be self-reflective learners, self-reflective human beings. And we do that by forming these principles as part of our positive relationships with each other, through staff and the wider school community as well. And that does include our parents and carers, because it is a holistic view of looking at it. And ultimately, we want them to learn better, behave better, and live better lives as well. And we're hoping in time, by using the process of using different kind of mediums, that they are able to do that and use those core principles in future years as well, because we want them to be good human beings once they leave Keyham Lodge School as well, and be better informed decision makers as well. So how do these strategies that we've created within the toolkit look at Keyham Lodge School? As mentioned by Jean and Alicia, Miriam, it's a whole school approach. It starts from the very top. It's the culture and ethos that is embedded a part of our DNA of our school. So some of the things that we do is we have bespoke student timetables according to their needs, according to their EHCPs, according to what suits them. That we model language, and that's the positive language result, but also reframing some of the language we use with peer-to-peer, staff as staff to peer, but also staff to staff as well, because they can only go by what we have as well. And as Jean just mentioned as well, raised a smile as well, that mistakes are welcomed. We actively welcome mistakes as well, and we want them to be their true, authentic selves throughout everything that we do as well. And one of the strategies that we use is PACE, Dan Hughes' PACE, playful, acceptance, curiosity, and empathy. And we look at that in our everyday model and our everyday strategies to help our children's mental health and well-being. So how do we protect our children and people within the school community using the strategies? Well, we do various things. We check in during breakfast and tutor time. We have a student passport that's bespoke, meet and greet, as discussed earlier. But the ultimate and the biggest tool at our disposal is relationships. And that is the core fundamental principle of everything that we do, whether we check in, we have a 2-minute conversation, or however that looks, that suits the needs of that child. We're protecting them and doing our best to protect their mental health and well-being. And we've proven that to be the most successful tool in our tool belt moving forward as well. So how does this look in action? So I've just chosen a child that I work with very closely, and is challenging at times. So in action, using this toolkit has been fruitful because it's enabled me and the other staff to look at where a child might be at the top of the ladder of toxic stress. How do we bring that down to sort of acceptable, normal stress that we may experience, normal mental health and well-being? So some of the things that we've done with this child or various children is just by listening to them, offering them that chance to have the safe space. We've got outdoor areas or we've got a therapy team, but ultimately we've given them what suits to their needs as well, and actually accommodating that as best we can, and using the emotionally available adults that are available in school, again, during the bespoke student timetables that we've done as well. And that's where the toolkit has been really valuable, because we've been able to pick and choose what works for us and for that particular child. And that's where that strategy of picking it what suits them and what may suit you as well. Looking at holistically, how does that look across a particular children across the school, and the school staff as well? So as a child, we've made sure that we acknowledge their feelings. It's not dismissed. We take a look at their interests and actually facilitating certain conversations that may prove to be difficult. And between as a whole school, we've been able to use different extracurricular activities to explore themselves further as well, and have that kind of rich conversations as well about mental health and well-being, and not shy away from it, because that's been really powerful for us, that we've been able to have those conversations and be okay with it. And that's also between staff as well. We offer a very safe space for staff and students to access, and that's where our therapy team are absolutely brilliant to facilitate those conversations as well. And one of the things that we've implemented recently as of this academic year is extended tutor time on a Thursday, actually, where we allow time for students to reflect on themselves and use that opportunity to bring any concerns, any positive relationships they want to talk about as well, because it's quite easy about mental health that we talk about the draw and the negative experiences, but we use it as a positive tool as well as the negative side of it. And on a Friday, we implement My Skills and Life Skills, and that's linked to our core curriculum, linked to emotions and feelings as well, which embed a part of the bigger picture of what we do to promote the mental health and well-being for all of our children. But we include it as a wider school community, because we allow staff to do that as well, because it's so important that staff feel okay within themselves to be able to share that with the children and people. So leading on to that, in terms of how does it look all together? So we ensure that staff are part of the process. We ensure that they know what the school vision is, they are part of that. We're proactive where possible. It's not always, with realism to attach to that as well, with mental health difficulties, and providing that scaffolding of support. I suppose, as mentioned earlier as well, that having that empathic view and understanding that we are different, that we will express it differently as well, and we will understand it differently as well. And that's where I think it's been really powerful, is understanding ourselves and understanding our feelings slowly. They might come in self-destructive, but hopefully over the years, over the weeks, and the effort that we put in, they'll be able to understand them a lot easier. And I suppose we offer a space, and that could be in a small room, that could be outside, that could be on the football pitch, that could be in cooking DT, where they feel safe, accepted and heard. And that has been the most powerful tool at times for our children and people, where they don't get that in everyday life outside of school as well. And that's where we feel that we're able to do that, but we're able to do that together. One of the things that we've done, and I can't recommend this enough, is I wish my teacher knew exercise. And I've done that myself, staff have done it. And these are just some of the things that our children have told them when we've actually just given them an opportunity to go, what do you wish your teacher knew? And it is quite breathtaking at times. Some of the things they've said, like, as you can see, I feel rejected, or I want to come to school than stay at home. And that's just what is happening at home that may be impacting the mental health and well-being. What's happening at home to mum, dad, carers that could be impacting their behaviour, because behaviour is a form of communication. So as I look to come to the end of how this strategy and what the vision is moving forward, I'd like to leave with this picture of the 3 frogs. And the idea is, from left to right, you've got the first frog who's really struggling to hold on, and you've got the middle frog who's very safe and content, and you've got the one at the end who's thriving. And if you link that to our children and people, our students, you know, that you may have seen today, I've definitely seen today as well. I've actually felt it myself. And accepting that as an adult as well, the students really appreciate that actually throughout a day, you may go through all 3 of those emotions, all 3 of those kind of feelings. And what our aim is to do is to use this toolkit together, that wherever their children and people sit on the branch, we want to keep supporting them. We want our children to be educated about their own mental health well-being for future years to come. And that's where this toolkit is so powerful for us as a school. And we hope you as professionals as well feel as well that you feel empowered, enriched and excited as well. And that's, you know, that's the aim, that's the vision. Hopefully our children and people, you know, are better equipped in the future as well. Thank you.
Still on mute. Fantastic. Thank you, Rahi. That's really brilliant. So can I welcome all of the panel back now? So if Rahi, Alicia, Miriam and Jean, brilliant. Great to have you all back. So now we've got some time for some, well, I can't see Alicia. Oh, yeah, brilliant. Now we've got some time for some questions. We've had quite a few questions coming in. First of all, I want to start off with, we've had lots of questions saying this toolkit is aimed at secondary students or secondary teachers. Could it be used by primary? And if not, Alicia, is there anything that we could point people to that would be more suitable for primary or for early years?
Yes, certainly. I do think that the toolkit is relevant to primary school teachers. There's definitely messages throughout, you know, in terms of the key questions and how we support mental health and well-being. But I would also point teachers in the direction of the Early Intervention Foundation and the Education Endowment Foundation, in collaboration again with Jean, produced a guidance toolkit for primary school teachers on supporting social emotional development. And within that, there's 5 kind of key recommendations, and one of which again focuses on the kind of everyday strategies, that first recommendation within that. It also talks about the whole school approach and the types of universal interventions that you might be interested in delivering at primary school level. So that's worth, we can also share the link to that. I can get that very quickly, Jamie. And Jean wants to come in as well.
Could I just say, I think that the challenges are different in primary schools, particularly, you know, you have to recognise that one of the reasons we did this specifically for secondary schools is that students have relationships with, you know, 10 different teachers, and in primary schools they have their class teacher. So it's a very different challenge. It's easier to build a relationship in primary school. It doesn't always go well, but it's easier. But nevertheless, as Alicia says, many of the areas we cover on, like promoting peer support and looking at self-regulation, but are just as applicable. But equally, there are some things primary schools, I mean, the idea of zones of regulation is very widely used in everyday primary classrooms universally now. So in some ways, the practice there is perhaps a little ahead, just because of the context, the way one teacher has one class. And so this guidance, you know, we don't want to leave primary colleagues out, but it was developed for a very specific purpose with the average, you know, the average physics teacher in mind. What can they do? They want to help, what they can do. So it's a different sort of question, and it would need a different approach.
Jean, that's helpful. I guess similar to that, we've had a couple of questions around how this might be used in with young people that are SEND or in a special school, or how you might be able to offer any strategies for pupils that have got PMLD. Have you got any thoughts that you could offer there?
No, not for profound and multiple learning difficulties. That again is absolutely got to be specific. Long ago, I worked for the government's national strategies, and we had a strand of work that was specifically about what not just for mental health, but for teaching and learning in general, specifically aimed at youngsters with profound and complex needs. And it needs that kind of national focus on it. It would be wrong to just try and stretch something into an area that is absolutely different. Though the work of Barry Carpenter, I think, colleague working with PMD, will know about that and know that you know, there's an awful lot there, but it needs to be properly done, not by experts. And I am not an expert on PMLD, nor is Alicia or Miriam or Jamie.
Okay, thank you. So I'm going to move on then to this question, which I really like. So someone had said, I really like, oh, it's gone now because there's so many questions coming in, they keep moving. Sorry. I really like the idea of, I wish my teacher knew this. Do you use it anonymously to get a holistic view, or do you encourage students to write their names and do a targeted intervention?
We encourage anonymous because that's where they felt safer and more accepted as well. The whole idea, actually we started during a staff CPD. So we've done that with staff to feel, how does that feel for you? We need to understand how that emotional feeling of, I wish my teacher knew when I was back at primary school, secondary school, college, uni, however, whenever that may have been, to then implement that within our school setting with our children and people. And we've actively shown them that actually we've done this exercise, so we're not just going to put something on you that we wouldn't expect, you know, us to do, but then go and do it in your own time. We have got little boxes they can put it in, or they can just leave it somewhere in the room. No one has to know what it's about, because a lot of it is to do with, I don't want my peers to know what I've written, or I don't want it to be seen or negatively impact me, whatever we've done. And it's been such an eye-opener. Quite emotional at times reading some of the things, and I've just managed to pick a few of I wish my teacher knew, and I would highly recommend that, because sometimes what that does, it enables the key worker staff member to dive a little bit further into it as well and see what are the support mechanisms that we can put in place as well. And that's been the beauty of it as well, is that it's enabled certain key staff to look at it and go, okay, what intervention could I put in place? What is it that I could do differently to support that child or young person? So that it's also opening another avenue, another tool in our tool belt to go, okay, it's quite simple. Post-it note, could be a piece of paper, however that looks, that works, do it. That it doesn't have to be you know, a post-it note as it were, but something that could just be applicable to your school setting.
Thanks, Rahi.
Could I just build on that? I think it's fabulous you do. I wish my teacher knew. I love it. I guess maybe, and you modelled it, and then teachers could do it in their own classroom with a box or whatever. I guess, would it be right that teachers could say to students, put your name on it if this is something that you feel that you could talk to me about outside of this, and that you're happy for me to know about it, so we can do something about it. Otherwise, don't put your name on it, and then it will give me a general picture of how I need to be a better teacher. But if you gave them that option of putting their name on it, would that what you can do? I've seen schools do that with worry boxes, for example, where they have primary schools have worry boxes, and children post their worries, and they can disclose if they want to.
Yeah, absolutely. The options there, and some put initials, and obviously we know because we're only like 118 students, so that works as well. So yeah, absolutely, Jean. Both way works. It just depends on your setting, whether you're a small school, large school, whether you're just doing as pastoral or certain departments, however that works. But yeah, absolutely, it does have benefits on both ways.
So Rahi, I'm just going to stick with you for a minute. There's a number of people on the seminar this evening that have said that I'm not a teacher, but I do work in a school. I might be a youth worker. I'm a different adult that works in school. We know there's a whole range of different adults that support and work in schools. So Rahi, I wonder if you can just explain how you might use this toolkit with other members of staff. And also, we've had a question specifically about, someone said, we're talking a lot about mental health first aiders and about emotionally available adults. Can you just say who these people are in your school? Are they staff already teaching, or are they different roles? So what does that look like for you in your school, Rahi?
So mental health first aiders, emotionally available adults could be anybody. For our children people, it could be anyone across the school platform. So for instance, it could be their catering teacher, it could be their construction teacher, it could be their maths teacher, or it could just be a pastoral support member of staff, or it could just be the head teacher. I suppose the beauty of it is, and I appreciate the difficulties when it's a larger secondary school setting as well, but it's someone that they can connect with, someone that they have a relationship with, and someone they can build those foundations with, that enables them to open and have those conversations as well. So it doesn't necessarily have to be the therapeutic team. It doesn't have to be mental health first aiders. Yes, they might be more kind of trained in those certain areas, and we've got trauma-informed practitioners now as well that might be better equipped in certain areas, but that doesn't distance themselves away from any child as well either. So, you know, it's and I mentioned it at the start of my presentation, it's all about building relationships and not putting those barriers in place. And that's been one of the most fruitful things, is time on the ground is now. So if we put it in the effort in now, it just reaps rewards. And it's that analogy of, you know, reaping the seeds that you sow. So it's kind of using that in practice. And we always have this thing as well, that our children are with us for 6-7 hours a day, and we can do our emails afterwards, but we can't buy that time that we have with them for 6-7 hours. Absolutely, yes, there's emails to do, there's meetings to be had, you know, I'm aware of that, but that time that we spend on the ground reaps rewards for years to come, because we've put the effort in now. And that doesn't matter who you are. You could be the cook and have a conversation with them while they're getting lined up for their food. And that's what we found. It could just be anybody. And that comes from the school ethos and culture as well.
Thanks, Rahi. Alicia, did you want to come in?
Just to come in on that, and just to add to what Rahi was just saying, I've had conversations here in Ireland with young people in secondary school, and who they would approach, you know, in relation to mental health difficulties or just some concerns or everyday concerns. And actually what was really interesting, because in Ireland, say, we have guidance counsellors with a specific role on the provision of counselling to secondary school pupils. What was really interesting was young people consistently said it's actually not the counsellors that they would go to, it's actually the maths teacher or the French teacher who they've developed a really good relationship with, who, you know, understands them and has a belief in them, which I suppose again goes back to that point of, you know, mental health is everyone's business, and young people will go to the teachers that they have a connection with.
Absolutely. Thanks, Alicia. Just before I move on to a couple of questions for you, Miriam and Alicia, I just want to say this, that Louisa shared in the chat, which I really like, that in her primary setting, she uses a good mistakes jar, and she pops a marble into a pot every time a student makes a mistake during learning time. This comes up a lot in maths, and I feel gives children confidence to have a go without fear of getting it wrong. I really love that. That is just fantastic. What a brilliant idea. If I was doing maths, it would come up a lot for me as well. There'd be a lot of marbles in the jar. Right, I've got a couple of questions for research. So Miriam, if I can ask you these. So first of all, someone missed the number of teachers and students that you worked with to gather the evidence. And can you just confirm that you spoke to secondary age students when you were doing this work?
Yeah, sure. Thanks for the question. So yes, the young people involved in this work were all secondary school aged, and we had a small group of young champions who were working with us directly, and then we had a survey. The survey with students still was quite small in terms of numbers. I think the numbers were around 30 or so, so it really wasn't a huge number, but it was people from across the country. But of course, it was not a complete or representative sample in any way, but it did help us to sense check really what we were saying and to hear from young people what their priorities are. In terms of the teacher surveys, there were 2 different surveys. The first one, again, was quite small scale, and that one was disseminated on social media and also by the Anna Freud Center. So we assume that the people completing that survey may have had a previous interest in mental health. But we've also conducted a larger scale survey where we work with TeacherTapp, and that larger scale survey was completed by 7,000 teachers. And interestingly, the survey findings of that larger survey really echoed the findings of the smaller survey, which really said that across the board, people have a very strong interest in supporting mental health and well-being, but don't necessarily feel that they are equipped to do so, which really shows how important it is that this guide is available. So hopefully it will really make a difference in practice.
Thank you. And another question to follow up is, did you assess the impact on teachers' workload when you were putting together this toolkit? And if so, did you know what would be the impact?
That's a great question. So in terms of, have we assessed it in past tense? No, we don't. We have spoken to teachers about what they think is feasible and what they can and can't do as part of their workload. And we are now looking for partners to help us assess the impact, both in terms of the workload, but also in terms of teachers' confidence and in terms of what kind of change they see. So if anyone attending this webinar or watching the recording later on would be interested in helping us with that, please get in touch, because of course as I explained, the toolkit is informed by the evidence, but we haven't assessed and evaluated the impact. And of course, we are keen to learn what is working with that toolkit, what isn't, and how a future version could be even stronger than the current one. So that's something we're definitely looking to do in the future. And for the time being, there's also a feedback survey on the site where the toolkit can be downloaded from. So if you have any immediate comments about what you find helpful, what you don't find helpful, what is too much of an ask for teachers to do in practice, please use that feedback option and just share your views. We really look forward to hearing from you how the toolkit is working in practice.
Thanks, Miriam. Okay, so I'm going to go to a question which I think is for Rahi and Jean, and this is a question I hear a lot. So someone said, our students sometimes find well-being fluffy. They laugh, they roll their eyes. I hear this all the time from teachers. Rahi and Jean, how do we overcome that with students? How do we take them, get them on board with well-being?
I'll kickstart it off. So in terms of well-being, I appreciate that is the reality of it. Sometimes I've seen it myself. You know, you mention well-being, you get roll of the eyes. I don't want to talk about it. I think it's slowly but surely changing that narrative, changing those perceptions, and ultimately having those conversations as well. You know, well-being, I appreciate, and we appreciate as a school in particular, that it's enhanced since COVID in particular, and a lot of the work that's been done since, and there's so much literature and so much resources out there as well that children are almost bombarded with it at times. It's on social media, it's around them everywhere they go, and they talk about well-being, but actually understanding what well-being is as well, and reframing that. You know, a lot of the time we talk about, you know, I know Alicia alluded to earlier about positive mental health, you know, and it's a collaborative part of everyday life. And actually things that they can do, like charging up, you know, their own personal battery, as it were, and just having those conversations so we've been able to do that by bit, drip feeding into, not just pushing onto them straight away, just having those positive conversations with them and actually going, this is what it could do, like good amount of sleep, putting your phone away, however that looks, especially at secondary school, because where social media is high use. And encouraging that well-being is a positive thing as well. We're not just looking at it from a lens of negativity as well. So we're trying to change that perception that it is something that's part of everyday life.
Can I add to that? Thank you, Rahi. It's fantastic. I think there's something, and I'm not good at this, I'm too old, but I think it's about knowing the language your own students speak, about feeling okay. You know, so you might have a chill out room instead of a well-being suite. What language do they use, and then frame what you do in terms of the street language, whatever they use to talk. Everybody cares about feeling okay, and they will have a way of describing it. I've never, sorry Anna Freud, never been a fan of the word mental health applied to children and young people at all, because mental is a term of teasing and bullying and abuse often used. You're mental, I've just heard it too much. And so well-being's better than mental health. I'm sorry about that, but I just still think there's this stigma around mental that exists. So I'd frame it in students' language, but then also things at the Anna Freud Centre and other organisations like Young Minds, there's loads of videos and tools of role models of, you know, rappers, and not just Prince William, but real people that our students in secondary look up to and admire, talking about their mental health and talking about what they do and how they've talked to other people and not bottled it up and so on. And so using lots of those to show that there's that people that kids look up to and see as relevant, they may not be our role models, but their role models, think this is important and don't think it's fluffy. But, you know, they're not alone. Politicians think a lot of this stuff is fluffy too. The word emotions, they get very worried about anything that any policies that are about students' emotions. It's quite hard. It's not British talking about feelings. So Rahi says it's a journey, isn't it? You can't do it quickly. You've got to do it very slowly, but talk about the language. I'm sure there's another word for feelings that's a lot more streetwise. Perhaps someone on the chat can come up with it.
Thank you. So it links slightly to this then is someone said since COVID, they've seen a decline in students' ability to communicate their feelings. How can we get them back up to speed without patronising them? Rahi, is that something that you've seen in your school?
Yes, absolutely. Firstly, we've noticed actually quite a lot of children and people unable to convey and express their feelings and emotions and understanding what it is I feel. Yes, we've seen increased anxiety and low mood and self-esteem and self-harm as well. But as I said earlier, behavior is a form of communication. You know, we've like June alluded to earlier as well, is that actually we've got to be able to understand now they are going to convey that differently. They might do it through social media. It might be a cry for help, but how is it that we're able to recognize that, and how are we going to react to that as well? And not, like you said earlier as well, not putting them in a room and go, right, so let's have a conversation. It's not a counseling therapy session. You know, it's not I'm going to take notes or this is what's going to happen. It's not prescriptive. It is adapting and changing to what suits them, because their frame of reference will look very different to our frame of reference. What we may believe is correct, and I use that very loosely, may be very different to what they're, you know, experiencing. They may find that quite threatening to just have a conversation face to face. Actually, a walk around school or whatever your parameters are, or excuse me, it could be a sport exercise. It could be something that you just, you know, you could just catch a ball and have a conversation through it. It's just finding different mediums to open up that the line of communication as well. And I suppose what's worked really well at our setting as well since COVID is having the ability to go, okay, that doesn't work. That's okay. That hasn't worked. That form of communication hasn't. It's not still work. What can we do else? What is it? Understanding and spending that time, because it's that investment. The investment in the child now hopefully gives you bigger rewards. And I'm not talking academic wise, but as a holistic, as a human being, because what is it that you want to achieve by the end of year 11? Yes, you're absolutely your kind of English, maths, science, your A to C, but we want them to be good human beings, because in 5-10 years time, when they walk down the street, are they able to convey their emotions and feelings? Are they okay to be okay? And are they going to be able to say hello to you and have that confidence and ability to share their emotion and feelings with people in the future? You know, where we may still be teaching, we may still be professionals, or we're retired. This is for the future generations as well, and actually adapting to that as well.
Thanks, Rahi. Alicia, I've got a question for you, because I really enjoyed your bit of the presentation where you were kind of just talking to us about kind of current prevalence around mental health and whole school approaches. And there's been a few questions in the chat around people saying, how can we convince SLT? How can I get senior leaders to take this on? How can I convince schools to have my school to have a whole school approach? What would you say that the evidence tells us about why it's important for schools to adopt a whole school approach? What can we do to take that to our senior leaders?
Yeah, I think you know, the evidence is compelling in terms of there's widespread recognition about we need to put curriculum in place in schools to support young people's social and emotional development. But actually what we've seen from the evidence base is really where you're starting to see sustained impact. So actually with interventions that are put into schools, their impact can tend to be in the short term. So we see it has improvements, but sometimes that impact isn't sustained in the long term. And where you start to see sustained impact is where these interventions are embedded in that whole school approach. And we've seen the evidence is particularly strong around those who are most vulnerable. So actually those, you know, who are vulnerable need the targeted support to be embedded within that whole school approach, where you're creating not just within a curriculum, but you're creating a supportive environment outside of the classroom through what you do in the corridors, through your policies, ensuring that your policies are supportive of young people's mental health and well-being, and that being your behaviour policies in particular, and not actually in contradiction. So it's definitely, we can see, you know, that there is a need for that. In terms of how we convince, I think the slight challenge, being honest, is that there's recognition that a whole school approach, it's messy. It's not as straightforward as going into a classroom and delivering a 10-week program. And I think schools need support in how to deliver a whole school approach. And we need more than just that high level guidance on this is what a whole school approach consists of. We need these types of toolkits and resources that really break down the whole school approach. So we need more to support leadership at a whole school level. We need to be going into schools providing that training for school leaders on what it is that they have to do and what are the strategies that they have to implement. So I think we're on a journey, as Rahi has said as well. I think we have further to go, and we have to support schools more in making a whole school approach accessible and possible, because it is messy and it is challenging.
I think you're right, Alicia. Sorry, Rahi, did you want to come in?
I just wanted to add something to that, Alicia. Thank you. Was the toolkit enabled for us in particular just to pick and choose, and that's what the toolkit enables you to do, is what your setting looks like, and if there is something in the toolkit that you can pick, and it could be the smallest of bit that could make the biggest of difference to your particular setting, your kind of classroom. And it could also be if you're just I say a year 7 teacher or year 9, and that impacts one classroom, that could benefit 30 students, who could benefit 3. And that's the beauty of the toolkit, that it's not one size fits all sometimes. And as Alicia said, absolutely, it is going to be messy, and there are going to be obstacles that you kind of come across, and there's going to be challenges that are with that as well. But that's where things like this, they're just pieces to the jigsaw, and the jigsaw may never be complete, but it's the aim to kind of get it as much as we possibly can to give them the best support available.
Thanks, Rahi. Someone in the chat said a whole school approach requires a whole training approach. And I agree, we need to be supporting our staff with training, don't we? So Rahi, you're a senior mental health lead. How could you use this toolkit as a senior mental health lead in your school? And how could you maybe roll it out or do some support for training for teachers?
Great question. So as a senior mental health lead, I think one of the key things that allows me and my colleagues, our senior mental health lead trainer, is to give them that view from a different lens. I think that training enables us to be able to look at it from a senior mental health perspective and how that could be applicable to our school setting, our wider school community, and also for our parents and carers. I know we've kind of briefly touched upon that, but they're such a huge part in this whole process in enabling kind of the mental health and well-being and the strategies that teachers use as well. And I know the Anna Freud, I know you run the Senior Mental Health Lead program, which has been absolutely fantastic to be able to educate, professionals to be able to use that. And what we've done as well is been able to use the expertise and again, building those key worker relationships alongside the expertise. And sometimes that may be the same person, that may be 2 different people. And we've made sure that that's okay, that it doesn't have to be one person either. So that's where the mental health lead training and this toolkit has gone hand in hand, because we've been able to kind of pick the senior mental health lead aspect of it. And that's been great because of what it's offered and the contents of it, but also the toolkit as well. And again, it's just picking what works, because every child is different, because we've got some children with very high ACEs, quite traumatic past and childhood. And that's difficult because sometimes that doesn't always work. We just need a completely different approach as well. And that's what we've been able to recognize, that actually that may not work for one child. You could have 5 students in your form group, but one of them, it doesn't quite work, but 4 of them it does. And that's okay. And sometimes it may not work at all. And accepting that actually you've not failed, you've not done what you want as a senior mental health leader or as someone who's looked at this talk. It's actually just going, okay, that's not worked currently. And it's that iceberg there, isn't it? And it's also looking at actually what else is going on as well and taking that time and patience.
Jean.
I just wanted to add that about almost pre-warning stuff. I think what you said, Rahi, about this won't work for everybody. Subject staff need to know about this. So for example, the relationship business, just the mental health lead should pop in that if some of the students have got attached trauma and attachment difficulties, any attempt to build a relationship with them, that they may, first of all, they'll push you away, just so that people accept that these are strategies that need to be differentiated for different students and not expecting it to work for everybody. And the same point I wanted to make about how you work, how a mental health lead might work with staff. I try to imagine what I'd do in a school. I think maybe it's first of all starting with the why, that there has to be something put out by first 2 senior leaders and then from senior leaders with the stats on why mental health affects attainment the effect it has on behaviour. So many, the stats that show how much behaviour is a symptom of an underlying mental health needs. So the why has to start. Why are we doing this? And then I think I just try and get senior leaders to say, can I just have 15 minutes once a week or once a fortnight at staff briefing time? Give me 15 minutes. We'll take a little chunk of this toolkit. We'll look at it together. And we'll get staff to think, is there any, they might say it's all rubbish, fine, but is there one thing that they might want to try? And then maybe they go away and try it out. And then next week they say, well, yeah, or, that might work. So you kind of get them, or alternatively, you work with one keen faculty at a time. I've seen this work in SEND, you take, let's take the maths department and just a team that wants to work on this, that's keen, a faculty that's keen on this, they start, and then you get this these champions within the school who say, yeah, we did this and it worked for us.
Thanks, Jean. A few questions coming through around staff wellbeing and thinking about the impact on staff. And so just thinking about as this workload, we've sort of touched on that already and what this means for staff. Is there anything that the toolkit can say about staff wellbeing, about how we might think about the impact of this, or what we might be able to do from the toolkit that is going to really think about the position of staff?
I think it's a really good question, Jamie. And it's also a core ingredient of the whole school approach. And it's widely recognised. If we're not taking care of our staff, it can be very difficult for them to be in a position to support young people's mental health. I do feel like it's almost a separate piece of work that we do need to do more on supporting staff mental health and well-being, and be that through actual training, and self-compassion being hugely important. There's a lot of messages within the current toolkit that are relevant, in regulating our emotions, in articulating our emotions, in being self-compassionate. But I think that there's more work to be done on supporting staff well-being.
The Anna Freud Centre has produced brilliant guidance already for schools on staff well-being. So that would be something perhaps to signpost in the chat. We just have a page on it, I think, don't we, in the end, Miriam, in this guidance. We wanted to say more, but in the end, we have clearly said, this matters. You can't look after others unless you look after yourself. It is the absolute foundation of it. And we want that to be heard. But the guidance wasn't a place to elaborate on that when there are existing tools that the Anna Freud Centre has brilliantly developed.
I just wanted to add as well around modelling, that something Jean mentioned earlier about times are changing and we live in a society where it looks very different. And I think we found, and just from my experience, that children and people appreciate honesty, and sometimes we underestimate that actually I'm not okay today. I think it was mentioned earlier in the presentation that I'm not okay, or I've got something on my mind, or I've got lots of marking, however that conversation looks, and they actually do appreciate that. And I think modeling those languages and your body language and how you go about it, they don't necessarily have that sometimes back at home, because they don't have an emotionally available adult to go, I'm struggling, or they might see it in a very different way. So I suppose the other aspect is not being afraid, try it out. That actually, I'm not okay, or I'm great, or this is what it looks like. Because sometimes we do that thing, don't we? Go, yeah, I'm really well, thank you, but actually you're shouting at them all the time, or actually you might not be. So it just comes across as two different messages, and that doesn't help build those relationships either. And I appreciate fully that in a classroom of 30, that may look difficult. In a school that's got 1,500, 2,000, that may look very different. And the pastoral team may do an amazing piece of work. But as Jean said about when you go at the door of a classroom, how are you doing? Are you being authentic? Are you being a true self? And that in itself will help build the relationship. And staff feel valued, that actually my emotions, my feelings, kind of my well-being is taken into consideration. I'm being honest.
Thanks, Rahi. And thanks, Jean, about for the praise about our resources. I think in the very last section of the toolkit, it links to quite a lot of the staff wellbeing tools that we have. on the Anna Freud website, so you can take a look at those. We've got time for maybe one more question. Jean, this is a question I'm going to direct at you, because I think you were talking about reasonable adjustments. So someone has said, I'm interested to know more about reasonable adjustments versus working to minimum safety behaviours in order to cope. So for example, sitting by the door and how to get the right balance. Any thoughts on that?
Well, I think the law on equalities law and reasonable adjustments, there are caveats about making sure that you safeguard everybody is clearly a priority. So the law is not that you have to do absolutely everything if it's going to actually affect the other learners in difficult ways. So there is a balance to be struck, but I'm not quite sure I'm understanding the question. But talking with a student about what would support them best in the classroom if they have a mental health need, and them saying, actually, I need to sit by the door so I can get out quickly. If there are then systems that's in the school where that student has somewhere to go, where there is a learning support unit or a quiet unit or a person that they go to, I'd like to see all students have a go-to place or person that's part of their own self-regulation toolkit. If that's in place, that there's a system that would keep them safe. So I'm not quite sure I'm understanding the issues of the safety of the pupil, but I have talked about the safety of others and safeguarding others. I know exclusions is a big point, isn't it? That schools have a right to exclude. That's clearly not in the mental health interests of the excluded pupil, but it's sometimes done sometimes for the safety of others.
Thanks, Jean. Just final question, we've got a couple of minutes. Someone said, how can you integrate this into a really busy secondary timetable where there's so much pressure on student time and staff time? Any thoughts, Rahi? You're working in a really pressurized environment. How have you done that well?
Another great question. I think absolutely right. I sit here with a very small cohort of students compared to the large secondary schools, the professionals that have joined in here, and we'll listen to it later on. It's sometimes, and that's what the toolkit does, it's there to pick and choose, but without almost effortlessly, seamlessly put it into your practice. It could be just having a conversation, as Jean mentioned earlier. How did your day go yesterday? How was your football match? Did that go well for you? Or you noticed something good? And it's sometimes quite easy to go, well, I need to do this, or I need to actually put this in place to kind of help my students. And yes, that is the case for some or all of the time in terms of what your setting is. But sometimes just going about your normal business and taking an interest, or just those small kind of nuggets of things that you do that will have the biggest of impacts. And that's a smile across the playground. That's your body language in the corridor as you walk around and there's hustling and bustling of all these children, your tone, are you shouting? Are you kind of communicating that in a very different way? And that instantly sticks with the children. And you may have that, you may not see that child for another time, but if they smile back at you, that relationship is built already. You shout at them, it's slightly broken. It's not, it's not that you can't fix it. And even in your classroom, if you're a classroom of 30, it's those small things, taking an interest in the way you kind of go about it. So to answer the question is sometimes just be yourself, be your authentic self, looking at what you do and how you do it. And believe it or not, if you look at it and then marry up to the toolkit, you probably end up doing quite a few of it already without even recognizing it. And that's the beauty of it as well, is that sometimes you look at a toolkit and you go, actually, I'm doing quite a few already. And sustaining that will yield the best results for you as a professional, as a human being, but more importantly, for our children and people who we're doing all this for.
Thank you, Rahi. Does anyone want to add anything before we close?
I just want to add one quote from the toolkit. The quote is, "Every interaction is an intervention." And I think perhaps maybe we can leave people with that thought.
Thank you, Jean. So we're going to close now because we've got a couple of minutes left, but I just want to say a huge thank you to our panel. Thank you to Alicia and Miriam, to Rahi and Jean. It's been such an interesting conversation. I'm hoping people can see in the chat, we've had so many positive comments and thanks, and lots of people saying that they've really enjoyed the strategies, that they've already downloaded the toolkit, they're going to take that back. Lots of people thinking about how they're going to use 15 minutes, Jean, in a staff meeting to talk to people about it, roll the training out, take take some of the evidence to SRT. So I'm hoping that we've really inspired people. So thank you for the panel. Thank you for the great discussion. And mostly thank you to all of you who we can't see, but thank you for joining us this evening. It's hard work to join a seminar after a full day of teaching and a full day of being at school. So we really appreciate you being here and being engaged and sticking with us till the end and getting involved in the conversation and asking so many useful questions. Just to say to people again, we absolutely are going to send out the slides. Everyone's slides, you'll get all of the slides and a recording of the seminar. So that will come to you in about 10 days. The seminar is going to finish in a moment, and when it does, you're going to be redirected to a feedback form. It'd be fantastic if you could take a couple of minutes just to fill it in, just to tell us what you liked or what you didn't like, so that we can do better next time. But thank you again. Please do stay in touch. If you want to get in touch with us, please use our email address, or you can contact us through the Schools in Mind network. We really appreciate you attending. I'm going to close there. I hope everyone has a fantastic evening. Take care. See you soon. Goodbye.